The sand was still warm beneath my bare feet as I walked back from the shoreline, salt air clinging to my skin. I could see him through the beach house windows, unpacking groceries like we'd done this 100 times before. But we hadn't. River was a stranger I'd met just hours ago, and now he was moving through my rented kitchen like he belonged there. The thought sent heat racing through me that had nothing to do with the setting sun. My phone buzzed in my hand. Keith again. I let it go to voicemail. River appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that easy confidence that had caught my attention on the beach. Everything okay? His voice carried that same warmth that had drawn me in during our conversation. By the water. I nodded, slipping the phone into my back pocket. Just my husband checking in. He didn't flinch at the word husband. If anything, his eyes darkened slightly, a knowing look passing between us. We both understood what was happening here, what had been building since the moment our eyes met. Across the sand. Want some wine? He asked, already turning back toward the kitchen. I grabbed a bottle while I was out. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. The bottle opened with a soft pop, and he poured 2 glasses of something red and rich. We settled on the deck, the ocean stretching endlessly before us, waves catching the last light of day. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. The way his eyes lingered on my lips when I spoke, how my pulse quickened every time his knee brushed mine. So what brings a married woman to a beach? House all alone? He asked, swirling the wine in his glass. I laughed, but it came out shakier than I intended. Space, time to think. Keith's been so buried in work lately. I trailed off, realizing how much I was revealing to this beautiful stranger. And what are you thinking about out here? His voice was lower now, more intimate. I met his gaze directly. Things I probably shouldn't be. The tension between us pulled taut like a wire. He set his glass down and shifted closer, his fingers finding mine where they rested on the arm of my chair. The touch was electric, sending warmth shooting up my arm and settling deep in my stomach. Valerie, he said softly, and hearing my name on his lips made something inside me flutter. I don't usually do this. Neither do I whispered back, though every part of me was screaming to close the distance between us. He stood slowly, his hand still holding mine, and guided me to my feet. We stood there for a moment, the space between us charged with possibility. Then his free hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb tracing along my jawline with deliberate gentleness. Tell me to stop, he murmured, his face inches from mine. Instead, I closed the distance. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, testing. Then something ignited between us and it deepened, his hands sliding into my hair as mine found the solid warmth of his chest. I could taste the wine on his tongue, feel the controlled strength in his arms as he pulled me closer. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Are you sure about this? My answer was to kiss him again, harder this time, my hands fisting in his shirt. He responded immediately, backing us toward the open doors of the house. We moved together like we were dancing, his hands exploring the curve of my waist, mine memorizing the feel of his shoulders beneath the thin cotton. Inside, the house felt different, more intimate, more private. He turned us so my back was against the wall, his body pressed against mine as his lips found my neck. I arched against him, a soft sound escaping my throat that made him press closer. You're incredible, he breathed against my skin, his hands mapping the contours of my body with reverent attention. My fingers found the hem of his shirt, tugging it upward. He helped me, pulling it over his head and tossing it aside. In the dim light filtering through the windows, I could see the definition of his torso, the way the muscles moved beneath tanned skin. Your turn, he said with a smile that was part playful, part predatory. With steady hands, he reached for the buttons of my blouse, taking his time with each one. The fabric parted slowly, revealing skin that felt hypersensitive to his touch. When it finally fell away, his intake of breath was audible. Beautiful, he murmured, hands skimming along my collarbone, down to the curve of my silhouette. Every touch sent sparks through my nervous system. It had been so long since someone looked at me like this, touched me with such focused attention. Keith and I had fallen into routine long ago, but this felt like discovery. River's hands were patient, exploring, learning what made me gasp and what made me arch into him. When his lips followed the path his fingers had traced, I felt my knees go weak. Bedroom? He asked against my throat. I could only nod, not trusting my voice. He swept me into his arms effortlessly, carrying me down the short hallway to the master suite. The bed was unmade from my afternoon nap, sheets tangled and inviting. He set me down gently, his eyes never leaving mine as his hands went to his belt. I watched, mesmerized, as he revealed himself to me piece by piece. He was magnificent, all lean muscle and confident grace. When he reached for me again, I went willingly, letting him guide me onto the soft mattress. What followed was a symphony of sensation. His hands and mouth explored every inch of exposed skin with devoted attention. He found places that made me shiver, spots that made me call out his name. The way he moved against me was fluid, natural, like we'd been lovers for years instead of hours. "Look at me," he whispered when my eyes started to drift closed. "I want to see you." I met his gaze as he moved with me, the intensity in his dark eyes nearly overwhelming. There was something raw and honest in the way he looked at me, like he was memorizing every expression, every breath. The pressure built slowly, deliciously, until I was trembling beneath him. His rhythm never faltered, steady and sure, driving me higher with each moment. When the tension finally snapped, it rushed through me in waves that left me gasping his name. He followed soon after, his body tensing against mine as he buried his face in my neck, his breath hot against my skin. For long moments, we lay tangled, together, hearts racing in tandem, the sound of the ocean drifting through the open windows. "Wow," I breathed when I could finally speak again. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest where it pressed against mine. "Yeah, wow." I should have felt guilty. Should have been thinking about Keith, about my marriage, about the implications of what I'd just done. Instead, all I could focus on was the feeling of River's fingers tracing lazy patterns on my back, the way his breath stirred my hair. "What happens now?" I asked softly. He was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. "Then, now we enjoy tonight. Tomorrow. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." I nodded against his chest, letting myself sink into the warmth of his embrace. Outside, the waves continued their eternal rhythm, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. But peace, I was learning, was a fragile thing. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a moment, I was disoriented, caught between dream and reality. Then memory flooded back, River, the wine, the way his hands had felt on my skin. I found him standing at the stove, wearing just his jeans from yesterday, cooking what looked like scrambled eggs. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the muscles of his back, and I had to resist the urge to go to him, to press myself against him and feel that warmth again. "Morning," I said instead, wrapping a silk robe around myself. He turned with a smile that made my heart skip. "Morning, beautiful. Hungry?" I was, though not necessarily for food, but I accepted the plate he offered, settling beside him at the small breakfast table. We ate in comfortable silence, the intimacy of the shared meal almost as affecting as what had passed between us the night before. "I should probably head back soon," he said eventually, and I felt something twist in my chest. "Of course," I managed, keeping my voice steady. It was wonderful, River. Thank you." He reached across the table to cover my hand with his. "Thank you. For last night, for this morning, for being exactly what I needed." After he left, I sat in the quiet house trying to process what had happened. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Keith and a string of increasingly concerned text messages. I called him back, manufacturing a story about an early morning walk on the beach, how peaceful and restorative this time away had been. "That's great, honey," Keith said, but I could hear the distraction in his voice. "Listen, I've got a client meeting in 20 minutes. Can we talk tonight?" "Sure," I agreed, relief and disappointment warring in my chest. The drive home felt endless. Every mile took me further from the beach house, from River, from the woman I'd been for those brief, intoxicating hours. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Keith was waiting with flowers and an apology about work keeping him so busy. He kissed me hello, and I had to fight not to compare it to River's kisses, not to notice how routine it felt after the passion I'd experienced just hours before. "How was your retreat?" he asked as we settled into our familiar evening routine. "Exactly what I needed," I told him, and it wasn't entirely a lie. That night in our own bed, Keith reached for me with the comfortable assumption of long marriage. I responded because it was expected, because it was easier than explaining why I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own life. But as his hands moved over my body, all I could think about was how different River's touch had been, how alive it had made me feel. 3 days passed before River texted, "Can't stop thinking about you." My heart hammered as I stared at the simple message. I was in the grocery store, Keith at work, surrounded by the mundane details of my regular life. The contrast was jarring. I started to type a response 3 different times before deleting each attempt. What could I say? That I couldn't stop thinking about him either? That every time Keith touched me, I wished it was River's hands instead? That I was considering driving back to that beach house just to see if I could find him again? Instead, I put my phone away and finished my shopping. But that night, after Keith fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, replaying every moment of my time with River. The way he'd looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever encountered. How he'd taken his time exploring my body, learning what made me respond. The sound of his voice when he whispered my name. The next morning brought another text. I know this is complicated. Just wanted you to know. That night meant something. To me. This time I responded. To me too. Are you okay? Came back immediately. I don't know, I typed honestly. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did, and I can't bring myself to regret it. Neither could I realized. Despite the guilt, despite the complications, I couldn't regret those hours of feeling truly alive. Our texting became a daily thing, nothing inappropriate, just connection. He told me about his work as a surf instructor, about the waves and the students who reminded him why he loved the ocean. I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about in years. My dreams of becoming a photographer, the way I felt like I'd lost myself somewhere in the routine of marriage. You should pursue photography again, he wrote one afternoon. I could see it in your eyes at the beach. You were seeing things the rest of us miss. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Keith noticed my distraction, but attributed it to the refreshing effects of my beach retreat. He started making plans for us to take a vacation together, maybe to wine country or Europe. I smiled and nodded, but all I could think about was sand between my toes and the sound of waves against the shore. 2 weeks after that night, River sent a photo, just the ocean at sunset, but I recognized the view from the beach house deck. No words, but the message was clear. He was thinking of me. I found myself standing on our back patio that evening, Keith inside watching the news, wondering what it would feel like to walk away from this life I'd built, the security, the routine, the comfortable predictability. When had it started feeling like a cage? Val? Keith's voice called from inside. You coming to bed? In a minute, I called back, but I stayed outside under the stars, my phone warm in my hand with River's number pulled up. I typed, I can't stop thinking about you either. What are you going to do about it? Came back almost immediately, and that was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do about the way River had awakened something in me I thought was gone forever? How do you go back to sleepwalking through your life once someone has reminded you what it feels like to be truly awake? I don't know, I answered honestly. I'll be at the beach house next weekend. Just thought you should know. My heart raced. Keith would be at a conference that weekend, something about sustainable architecture that he'd been excited about for months. I'd already told him I might visit my sister, keep myself busy while he was away, room for a photographer. I found myself typing before I could think better of it. Always. That Friday afternoon, I threw a bag in my car and drove toward the coast with my heart pounding and my camera bag in the back seat. I told myself I was going to take pictures, maybe do some of that thinking Keith was always encouraging me to do. But I knew the truth. I was going back to River, back to that version of myself that felt fearless and alive and beautiful. I was going back to remember what passion felt like, what it meant to be desired rather than simply comfortable. The beach house looked exactly the same, but River was waiting on the deck as I pulled up, like he'd been watching for my car. He didn't say anything as I walked up the steps, just pulled me into his arms and kissed me like he'd been drowning and I was air. I wasn't sure you'd come, he murmured against my lips. Neither was I admitted. And now? I pulled back to look at him, taking in the warmth in his dark eyes, the way he looked at me like I was precious. Now I'm here. This time was different, less desperate, more deliberate. We took our time rediscovering each other, mapping the changes 2 weeks had brought. His hands were patient and reverent, relearning every curve and hollow. When he whispered my name, it sounded like a prayer. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets as the sun set outside the windows, and I realized this wasn't just about the physical connection anymore. Somewhere between the first night and now, this had become about finding myself again, not just as a woman who could be desired, but as a person with dreams and wants and the courage to pursue them. I bought a camera, I told him as we watched the stars appear outside the window. Yeah? I could hear the smile in his voice. A good one. Professional. I'm going to start taking pictures again. He tightened his arms around me. That's incredible, Val. I'm proud of you. No one had said they were proud of me in so long I'd forgotten how good it felt. We spent the weekend wrapped up in each other and in possibilities. River showed me hidden beaches and secret tide pools, places only locals knew about. I took pictures of him, of the landscape, of the way light played on water. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. But Sunday came too quickly, as it always does. What happens now? I asked, echoing the question from our first night. River was quiet for a long moment, his fingers combing through my hair. I think that's up to you. He was right, of course. The choice was mine. I could go back to Keith, to our comfortable life, and pretend these weekends had never happened. Or I could be brave enough to reach for something real, something that made me feel alive. I need time, I said finally. I know. I'll be here when you're ready, for whatever you decide. The drive home felt different this time. Instead of moving away from something, I felt like I was driving toward a decision. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I knew what I had to do. Keith was already home from his conference, puttering in the garden like he did when he needed to think. He looked up when I got out of the car, and something in my expression must have given me away because his face changed. We need to talk, I said simply. He nodded, setting down his gardening tools. I know, some conversations change everything, even when they're long overdue. Some decisions feel like jumping off a cliff, even when you're finally ready to fly. Looking back now, I think I knew from the moment I saw River on that beach that my life was about to change. Not because of him specifically, but because he reminded me of who I used to be, who I still could be if I was brave enough to try. The rest, as they say, is a story for another time. But tell me, when was the last time someone made you feel truly alive? What would you risk for a chance to feel that way again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.